Hey gang, Sean Geek here,
And Fast Fret.
and we have two storefronts. If you are a TeePublic fan, you can browse our inventory over at TeePublic, which is teepublic.com/ Sean Geek Podcast.
Or redbubble.com/people/Sean Geek Podcast.
You can get anything from either storefront, from t-shirts, stickers, phone cases, accessories of all kinds. We're talking masks, notebooks, mugs, pillows, totes, tapestries.
Oh my.
Oh my, everything's there. Just go to those addresses. Also, check the show notes and help support the show. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Welcome to the Sean Geek Podcast with me, Sean Geek. Fast Fret is not here today. Karen is not here today. It is a very early 6 in the morning, well before I start my shift at work. Why? I just feel like I do. I just feel like doing it. I just want to do it. It may sound a little lethargic or whatever, but so be it. So it's 2020, it's 2023. Yeah, it is. And we had a good year at the podcast. A lot of great things happened. We expanded our umbrella. And we tried a lot of things last year. We tried things that were a little bit different. We had guests on, new friends to the show. We are not an interview show, and I will continuously repeat that. However, we have had guests, and when we have guests on, we don't interview them naturally, not usually. It's more a conversation, because that's what this show is about, conversation. So, what do you think about 2023 on our show? What do you think was hot? What do you think was not? Let's pick what was hot. What was the most downloaded episodes of the year? Sorry, there's lots of pausing because I'm actually looking at things at the same time. So, um, I think this is 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Good. They're broken in blocks of 10. What was our 10th most downloaded and or streamed episode of the year? Oh my God, I can pull up the analytics here. Oh, nice. Well, how about that? All right. So the 10th most downloaded episode of the year, which was recorded January 3rd, we had on Uncle Sinner. Uncle Sinner is a local artist, and by local I mean Manitoba artist. I stumbled upon him when I heard him on the Witch Police Radio show, and I heard it, and I'm like, wow, this guy's really good. He's an amazing musical artist. Seems to do everything by himself. Um, I spoke with him. I think his son records him, and I really enjoyed his appearance on there. And but I felt after Sam had interviewed him, I said I want to know a little bit more. Like I wished I could have been there with Sam because I had some questions of my own. So I this is not the first time this has happened. So I reached out to Sam. I said, dude, that was a really good interview. Blah blah blah. Uncle Sinner's amazing. He's like, oh, then have him on your show. Like, Oh, okay. So I did. I reached out to him. I told him I wanted to buy off of him, and he graciously came to my home, dropped off some stuff for me. I gave him some money, and then I had him on the show. And what a goddamn delight. And that was the title of the episode, Uncle Sinner, a goddamn delight. And that's a quote from Uncle Sinner himself. Anyway, what I heard on the show and what I picked up, I realized that he's not a one trick pony by any means, because he kind of had a gruff Tom Waits ish sound to his voice, but he was so much more than that. Um, he had also a side project, if you want to call it, called Star Thistle, which was a bunch of other stuff that he wrote. And he didn't want it to necessarily be not associated with Uncle Sinner, but he kind of wanted it to stand on its own. And that CD became one of my top listens to last year. I listened to it so much. It was so good. Um, Now, because he's local, um, people haven't heard about him, right? Or maybe not as many people have heard about him, but you got to go listen. Go look for Uncle Sinner. He's on all the streaming services. He's got some amazing covers. He's got a Zeppelin cover done in his style. Might be a good place to start, but then I'd strongly recommend, after giving him a test drive, go back and listen to that Star Thistle. Star Thistle, really good stuff. Highly recommend. Um, but the other thing too was he was also a great interview. Just a great interview. Yep. So number 9 on the list was episode. So sorry, Uncle Sinner was episode 356. If you're looking, um, so the number ninth most streamed episode, released in September of 22. On September 26th was episode 396, Canadian Rock, Buffon's Housecoats, and a Canadian David Lee Roth. What the heck is that meant to be all about? Well, let me tell you. I'm actually going to pull it up here. 396. Wow, this one has some legs, man. So, did really well initially in its month of release. It carried through October, had another stream of downloads in October, and then another stream of downloads in December. Did very well. That was the episode where we had on new friends of the show and the podcast will rock. Mark Meyer, Corey Morissette. They have a show, a Van Halen podcast. I immediately became a fan. I really liked their everyman quality. They were just like us. They were two guys digging Van Halen and talking about it, which, interestingly enough, is the a Van Halen podcast was something Todd and I talked about at one point, and we just didn't do it because we felt that we couldn't play Van Halen songs without getting our podcast taken down. Not even putting two and two together when you think about the Pot of Thunder podcast and how they played uh Kiss songs and then other songs for years and years and years and years and years. So anyway, oh wait, that wasn't number 10. That was number, well, that's right. So that was number 9. And the title of Buffon's house coaching a Canadian David Lee Roth. Where does a title like that come from? Well, the Buffons had to do with the hairdos because we ended up showing pictures of some of these artists to show our American counterpart, Mark Meyer from Tennessee, what some of these bands look like if he wasn't aware of who they were. And there was starting with Rush, there was um predominance of wearing house coats while performing. They, I guess they sort of looked like kimonos or something, but and the Canadian David Lee Roth was Max Webster, a amazing frontman, kooky, crazy, lots of energy. That's our David Lee Roth from Max Webster, and we played a Max Webster song. There you go. So anyway, this was a two-parter. This was one of the parts of the two-parter. Number 8 episode of the year, released in January of 2022, was We Commit to Hawkeye and Shake Our Heads on Venom 2. This was a Karen centric episode. It was released January 10th. It was a lot of fun. Another great Karen episode. We both really, really liked Hawkeye. Hawkeye was, it was just, I don't know, it was one of those shows. It was just so good and it hit everything that we wanted in a show. Um, it was just amazing. Yeah, it was just amazing. It was good. Um, we kind of felt he was getting the short end of the stick. He finally gets his own show. I know some people didn't like it, but I was a fan of the source material that it came from, which is um uh which I bought as a hardcover trade. Um and it was just so good, and they really took a lot of visuals from the comic, which I always like when instead of just doing a Marvel movie or Marvel TV show, they're like looking at the source material and they're taking images from it and taking beats from it, and they really did it. And we both love this show, the Tracksuit Mafia, um, and really at Jeremy Renner's heart is it's all about family with him in real life, and this show was all about family, and it was all about trying to get back to his family and his kids. And I'm going to go on record right now and state that I like the MCU's version of Hawkeye better than I like the comic version of Hawkeye. I like the fact that has a family. In the comics, he doesn't really have that. He's a swinging bachelor, and he's always, on to the next relationship. But I really like how they play him in the films. Like I don't know, he's really, really good. And we also talked about Venom 2, which I had seen, and we hated it. But you can hear us talk about it. It was a really good episode. It was a really good episode. Easily one of my favorites. That was 8. So number 7, episode 370, released April 4th. The Goodwill of That Shelf Monkey, Moon Knight. Obviously, we're talking about Moon Knight. Obviously. So one thing that we do on the show when Karen's on, we really try to be consistent with not reviewing a Marvel show until the Marvel show is done. I know a lot of people do episode by episode breakdowns, and those are great, but we want to do things a little bit different and really looking at the thing as a whole. And honestly, like to do a whole episode on like to do a whole episode per week on a show. That schedule is grueling, and we don't just do geek on this show. That's when me and Karen get together. We do geek, but we can't do that all the time. But anyway, this was a we had a whole segment where we went through all of Marvel's forgotten TV shows, and that was a lot of fun. Um, we also gave a great shout out to Shelf Monkey by Corey Redicop, which is one of my favorite books of all time. Um, and then we also, and here's the thing, this is what we do on our show. When it's a Karen centric episode, we really break down the comic side and kind of point out where things come from in the MCU, from its comic origins and how it's pulled. And Kevin Feige and I are, I think, roughly the same age. And I think we've grown up in the same eras of comic books. And it seems like a lot of the things that he likes, I like. So when things are being put together and he has a heavy hand in things, like they're dipping into things that I like very, very often. Um, and then we actually had with Moon Knight, it dipped into a whole thing about the horror side of Marvel comics, and if we can expect any of that to show up. And we were making predictions back then that Man Thing was going to make an appearance, um, which was very interesting because I don't even know if they had announced Werewolf by Night by that point. But anyway, great episode 370, and that was in April. Now, moving on. Let's keep going. This would be number 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Six most streamed episode of the year. Episode 394. One break coming up. Fair warning. Side B. Yes, that guy. Eric Senich was on the show. We generally with Eric Senich episodes, because we all go off in the weeds as it is, but when Eric's there, we don't just go off in the weeds, we go off in the bush, we go off in the rivers, we go off down the road. These episodes are long, entertaining as hell, but long. So this was a split episode. So we actually broke the Fair Warning album into two sides, as if it were an album. Covered side one in this one episode, but this episode, our sixth most streamed episode, was side B of Fair Warning, and we reviewed song by song by song. But this episode also contains our overall ranking of every song on the album. Really, you do want to watch both. You do want to listen to both episodes for sure. Fifth most. Oh my God, it's too early in the morning. Episode 5, our fifth most streamed episode, was episode 372, released April 18th. Spin the Book, Van Halen's 5150 Part 2. So it was another split episode with Eric Senich. We did 5150. This is side 2 of the 5150 album. We review it, offer our rankings of every song on here on there, and which one we think is the number one song, which one we think is the number 9 song, I think, for that one. Then we have, so for the fourth most I can't say it, it's the fourth most downloaded song. Number 4, episode 384, released July 4th. Chris L. from Pot of Thunder, Draking Incorrect Headlines. This was part 2 of our Chris L. And Chris L's from Pot of Thunder. We've mentioned Pot of Thunder already this episode. Huge fan of the show, been listening for years. They just hit their 10th anniversary. They're really good guys, and Chris was very gracious to appear on our show. Give a shout out to Corey Morissette for setting that up. And ever since then, I chat with Nick and I chat online, and I've gotten to know Nick a little bit. Nick's great. Well, I haven't spoken to America's Little Brother yet from the show, but we'll get to that eventually. But Chris was great. He was just great. Thanks, Chris, for coming on the show and being the fourth most streamed episode of 2022. Number 3, episode 393. Eric Senich, yet again. Somebody said, fair warning, Lord, strike that poor boy down. We cover side 1 of Fair Warning. And it was great. It was really great. Eric really dips into history, recording. It's really good. It's really good. It's always great when Eric's on the show. Number 2, another Eric Senich episode, Spin the Book, Van Halen's 5150, Part 1. Enough said. I think you know what we're doing there. And number 1, episode 383, Chris L. from Pod of Thunder has arrived. It was a whirlwind getting Chris on the show because I brought it up with Corey, because Corey had him on his show, and I'm like, I'd love to get Chris L, but it seemed like it just seemed like one of those things like there's no way I'm gonna get a Chris L on our show. Our show's this little show. Pot of Thunder's this big show. Corey's like, I'm sure I can set it up. Hooked me up with Chris L. Chris L asked when I wanted to do it. I suggested Friday that week was just like I don't know if I asked him Tuesday or Wednesday or something. And then Friday he said, yep. And then we did it on Friday. It was that easy. Friday nights usually with the family, but my wife said, you do this. And we did it. And that was our number 1 most streamed episode of 2022. It was released June 27th. Again, like I said, it was a 2-parter. And he was so gracious. He was so gracious. Thanks, Chris. And again, go listen to Pot of Thunder, but also go listen to Booked on Rock with Eric Senich. Again, Eric had that show, but he also had a show called Discovery, which is how I discovered Eric Senich. And Discovery is probably still one of my favorite podcasts, all-time favorite podcasts. I do like Booked on Rock, don't get me wrong. But I feel like Discovery had his love all over it. That's gross. But no, it was the show he was meant to do, and then his show got pulled. Well, I'm not going to get into it here. Eric can go into it, but I don't know why, but for some reason, I don't know. But anyway, and further on, lots of episodes with Karen, and the podcast will rock. They had an episode in the top 10. And Uncle Sinner, go check him out. Just look up Uncle Sinner, you'll find him. And the podcast will rock. Maybe a little bit more difficult to find because I think in some places it's called And the Podcast Will Rock. In other places it might be called Podcast Will Rock. I'm not sure. But when you put podcast in the title, sometimes it screws up the search functionality in Google. But anyway, go check it out. It's really worth checking out. It is awesome. Those guys are good. And Karen, who's been promoted, if you go to our SeanMcGinnity.ca page, her bio is there. She's there. She's now officially and properly a part of our team. I can't rename the show. I know the first thing that people are going to say is, well, it's called the Sean Geek and Fast Rep Podcast. Where's Karen? Good point. Great point. But that being said, how do I do this? Like we used to be called the Sean Geek Podcast, and we rebranded because we got a lot of pressure that, Todd's not getting any credit, which was true. And Todd is a big part of the show. I mean, he's there almost every week, except for when Karen's there. And he's the one that really put polish on the show and kind of gave it its feel that it has. And I owe a lot to Todd. It's just like when we're in a band together, before he's there, it's a bunch of pretty good songs. And then Todd comes in and then they become bunch of really great songs because Todd has a way of polishing things and making things good and adding his suaveness and his baritone voice. So we renamed it Sean Geek and Fast Rep Podcast, but unfortunately, that's not how the world works, or that's not how Google works, or that's not how podcast players work. So the minute you change the title of your show, there's an entire rebranding process that happens. And I'll be honest, most people thought the show stopped and couldn't find us anymore. And our audience, I'm going to be blunt, our audience got cut in half, which is really, really frustrating. You think, oh, well, I'm just going to change the name of the show, but all the search functionality is still there, which I did make sure, because if you search for us, you search for Sean Geek Podcast, and that is our socials and all that sort of stuff. And you think that would have made it easier, but it's not. It didn't quite work. So if we were to change it again to Sean Geek Fast Fret and Karen B, we would have the same issue. It's been a couple of years since the rebranding, and we're still building back up. It's almost like starting the podcast over from scratch every time. So that being said, Sean Geek and Fast Rep Podcast with Karen B. I might have to call it that or something. I don't know what to do. Anyway, we'll see you guys on the flip side. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for listening. Thanks for keeping our audience growing and growing. And thanks for all these special guests that really rounded out our top 10. And thanks for Karen for joining our show. You are awesome.
Fans of the Sean Geek Podcast, this is the Core Geek talking at you. Did you know that the Sean Geek Podcast has merch available? That's right. Head on over to SeanMcGinnity.ca and click the merch link at the top of the page. You'll be taken to the Sean Geek Podcast store on TeePublic, where you can find the Sean Geek Podcast logo on t-shirts, totes, masks, and more. And best of all, a portion of the sales goes to help support the podcast and allow Sean and Todd to keep bringing great content your way. Once again, go to SeanMcGinnity.ca and click the merch link at the top of the page. And while you're there, don't forget to download the latest episode.